Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose?
My guest this week is a New York Times best-selling author working in the comics industry. He's worked with Marvel and DC, but is best known for his Mind Management series, which recently transmogrified into board game form. He's also worked with Keanu Reeves on Berserker, which became the highest-ordered monthly comic since 1991. My guest this week is Matt Kindt. Matt, welcome to the cabin.
Thanks for having me. I can't tell you how excited I am.
So my first question is, how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take to the cabin?
You know what? For a minute I was like, oh, I'm gonna really like ponder the thing, and then I ended up just going through my Board Game Geek, like my list online. I just went through it one time and then wrote down the first 5 that sort of spoke to me. So it was almost like a gut reaction to the answer. So I don't know. I looked at it again today. I was like, oh, I wonder why I picked Hive, but I'll think of a reason.
And so what's your kind of view towards your games? When you look at your collection, is it purely these are games that I think are really good, or is there an element of nostalgia when you look through your collection?
I don't have nostalgia for them because I came to sort of games kind of late. Like maybe the last 5 years, like until 5 years ago, the first Gen Con, I tagged along with a friend of mine who was going there to support a new like role-playing game thing. He was based on one of his comic books. And so I just tagged along because we're friends, and I'm like, oh, I'll go. It's a fun, short trip for us. And then I just walked around the convention and I couldn't believe how many board games there were. I had no idea. Like it was like this world opened up to me. And I've been doing comic books for like 20 years. So I've been to over like 200 conventions in my lifetime as a professional. And I sit at the table and you can see somebody that hasn't been to a comic book convention before. And they're kind of looking around and wonder, they were drugged there maybe by a spouse, and and I had that same look that I've seen on people's faces at comic conventions where, what's going on here? What is all this? And then I started to look around. I'm like, the first game I saw when I walked in was Cthulhu Wars, the big, Andy Peterson and those big figures and everything. And I was like, is that a game? I didn't understand. And, I was like, well, I think I'm going to get that because I don't know if I'm really into games, but those will just look cool on the shelf, and then I started walking around more, and then that convention sort of opened my eyes to like what this industry is and what the hobby is about. And I remember going to the hotel at night and nobody's in the room. Everybody's in the lobby, like playing board games, and it's like just strangers just meeting up and sitting down, playing whatever, and everybody walking around and sort of like, hey, what are you playing? What are you playing? And it was just such a weird, great community and like a social activity that I'd never realized existed. That it just sort of sucked me in, and by the 3rd day of Gen Con, I had like a trunk full of games that I was driving home with. And so my nostalgia, back to the original question, is I was like, I never considered myself into board games or games in general. I played games growing up. I talked to my mom and I was like, we would play like, there's Melbourne and Husker Du and all these like the games that like from the 70s and 80s, that everybody kind of had. I had the Mad Magazine board game that I remember having that as a kid. So if I had nostalgia, it was maybe I remember playing games, but I never felt like playing them again. So I look at my shelf and it's all new stuff, like within the last 5 years. And then except for Restoration Games did a redo of Stop Thief. I don't know if you know that one, but I had that when I was a kid, and it had like this little electronic thing that looked like a phone, and it would make the noises, and you're trying to track down the thief based on the noise clues. And I remember loving that game, and they redid it with the phone app, and I was like, I think that's the only game I own that's like, oh, I remember that, and that was fun. I played with my daughter, and yeah.
And so it seems to me that comics and board games would be sort of reasonably comfortable bedfellows. I mean, what are the differences between the two communities, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is, having done comics most of my life, you go to a convention. I used to go to comic book conventions as a fan, and you sort of dig around in the quarter bins and try to find deals and just buy stacks of comics and books, and then you take those comics, and then you just kind of go back to your hotel room and look at them, like either by yourself or with I would go with my brothers. So we go back and like look at our comics and just hang out. Comics is kind of a solitary activity. So that was the biggest contrast to me, was people doing the same kind of activity, like going and buying a bunch of the thing, but instead of just going back to their room by themselves, they're going to meet up with people, or going to like the hotel and hang out, and like this weird social interaction that comics just hasn't had, and it's something I'm not good at. Like, it's made me more social than I've ever been. I have more friends now than I've ever had, just by the nature of having this kind of excuse to get together. It's like it would be weird for me to email or text friends and be like, hey, let's just get together and hang out and talk. It's like, about what?
So are you an introvert? You're a writer, you're a reader, obviously. I mean, are you an introvert? Because I find that board games are kind of an oasis for the introvert, where they can be with people but have something to focus on other than just conversation. Is that the case for you?
Yeah, it's definitely that, and I comics is like a lonely activity, making them especially, like you're writing, you're by yourself, or you're in your own head, drawing, it's the same thing. It's not like a thing you do together. I think like the lone exception is like in school, if you're taking an art class, everybody's sitting around drawing and talking, and that's fun. But as you get older and you start to do it professionally, that kind of goes away, because 99% of those people in your art class, they went and got real jobs, and we're the few of us that are left are stuck drawing alone. And you're just try to group together. And I have a studio I share with a friend of mine who does comics as well, Brian Hurt. He draws Six Gun and some other things. But we've been sharing a studio for maybe 10 years. But yeah, it definitely is like, it's an excuse to be like, hey, why don't you come over? We're going to play some games, and then you end up just building like friendships in a weird way, where I normally wouldn't ever do that.
So let's go back to the beginning then. You grew up in St. Louis. What was the comic book scene like there at that time?
Yeah, it's interesting. So this is like late 70s. And I remember the first comic shop I ever went into it's like maybe a mile from where I live now. Less than a mile, I can walk there. And it's a pizza place now, but at the time it was it was called Rivendell, and it was mostly D&D stuff. So you walk in and there's D&D, like those metal figures everywhere, and D&D everything. And then they had like two shelves on the back wall, and comics were just stacked flat on the shelves, and you would just go back there and you could like look through them, and it was like new comics, and that's how you kind of buy them that way. And it's just whatever they had. So comics wasn't like a big. I didn't realize it was like a thing to be collected or anything like that. And then my brother, who's a little bit older, was more into it, and so I would see him buying X-Men or Daredevil or something. I'm like, oh, I want to read those, but he wouldn't let me read them, so I'd end up getting my own. And but yeah, we that was the one little shop we had. They didn't have a lot of comics. And then most of my comics came from like the grocery store. There was a spinner rack and you just buy them off the rack next to the magazines. And that's kind of how I got sucked into comics. And by the time I got to like high school, you know, there's a convention in Chicago and I would drive up there with my brother. And then that was the first time I'm like, wow, it really blew my mind, all these comics and all the stuff you could never find. And it was just loved. I remember I've loved comics since I was like maybe 7 years old.
And so, you know, I've spent a very peripatetic life, moving around a lot and never really staying in one place, particularly never putting down roots. And yet you've been in Missouri your whole life pretty much. I mean, what is it about that place that keeps you there?
Yeah, well, that's easy. It's family. I met my wife in art school and her family's here. And so we just kind of like never felt like we wanted to move away from, you know, parents. I have a brother here that I'm really close to. He's kind of my best friend growing up, and my wife's best friend's still here. Like she's had since high school. So really, it's just like people keeping us here. And honestly, like at the beginning of when I was getting into comics, comics doesn't pay a ton of money, to be honest, especially when you're first starting out. So it was sort of the cost of living here was affordable. And I think I had graphic design jobs when I got out of school. I had 3 different kinds of graphic design jobs and sort of floated around and was doing design during the day. And then I would come home and work on my comics at night. And then eventually I got laid off from a job at my last day job like 20 years ago. And was like, I think I can make enough just doing my own comics to at least, you know, pay the house payment and pay the utilities and make a go of it. And then my wife at the time had a regular day job, which helped a lot. She supported us more than I did, but it let me get on my feet and figure it out. But I think if we had lived somewhere, you know, West Coast, East Coast, or a bigger city, I couldn't have afforded to do it. And I think that's one of the things I like. People ask for advice on career and comics or that kind of thing. Mostly, it's try to live within your means, because you end up making career choices based on money. And when you do that, you're not making your best creative choices. You're making financial choices. And I think I've been in a good position. I stumbled into it. I'm not going to say I've cracked the code and figured it out. I stumbled into this idea of just living within my means and being able to then just do whatever I want to do, tell the stories I want to tell, work on the books I want to do, and turn down jobs because I don't want to do them. Not take something just because I needed the money.
And so you started by publishing your own mini comics. What were those initial things that you did?
Oh man, they're so bad. Here's what I'll say. I'll say that the ideas were good. You know, the concepts were good, but the execution, my art was kind of rough, and I think the storytelling is there, but I would never show them to another human being. I have a box of them here in the studio, and somebody will find them when I'm dead, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, he's right. He wasn't being modest." Like, the ideas are pretty good, but man, the execution leaves something to be desired. But no, I got out of art school, and in art school, this is back in like the 90s. Comics weren't really considered like a valid art form, and I'm not sure they still are, but they have a little more prestige than they used to. So at the time, I just kept my ambitions a secret. You know, I learned to paint, I learned to draw. I would do like these big drawings and paintings that fit the criteria of what the project was. You know, figure drawing or whatever. But then I would do these little, like 100 little squares around the outside edge, the border, and it was like a little sequential story, you know, that went with the big picture. And that was my way of like sort of sneaking in comic books and narrative into this art without them looking at it and saying, what are you doing? Like, why are you, this isn't a comic book class, you know? So it forced me to think about comic books and storytelling in a different way, just to sort of stay undercover so I wouldn't get torn up in the critiques, you know? And I think that sort of formed me as like a creator when I got out of school, is that I just approached comic books differently. I was like, I'm going to do, I don't want to do like something I've seen before, you know, try different formats, different things. So a lot of my early stuff, I was printing on different papers, and this is all by hand too. I was like using photocopiers, and at my day job, I would stay after work and like print out color covers on this fancy paper stock, you know, and jam up the printer, and then and then desperately try to unjam it before work the next day. But I was just playing with format, different paper, and ways of binding. You know, I did like weird tape bindings and sewn bindings, and just like handcrafting these books. So I was trying to do it all. I wanted to design the books and tell the stories and do all the art. And I would say that like while I'm better now, I don't think they're that bad. I think they were just me trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, you know. And I would take these, I would print like 100 copies, and then I would take them to local comic shops that would take books like mini comics on consignment, and just drop them off there, you know. And then I would never go back. You know, you could go back and get your money if they sold, but I was too afraid to go back because if they didn't sell, I was going to be depressed. So I never went back. I remember I took a batch to Chicago. This is like maybe a 5-hour drive from here. I was up there. I dropped a batch of those off, and then of course never went back. But then maybe 15 years later, I was at that store for a store signing for a published book. And I was telling the story to like one of the guys there, and he's like, "Oh, we don't throw anything away. So if you drop stuff off here, we might still have it down in the basement." Like, kept everything. And I was like, "Well," and he went down to look, and I was like, "Well, if you have it, I'm going to be depressed." And he went down, and he's like, we had it. They had like 2 copies. I was like, "Well, maybe you can maybe eBay those now." But yeah,
it was only 2 copies though. It wasn't a big stack of them.
Yeah,
so.
No, that's true. But I probably dropped off 5. So.
And so when you first started creating, I mean, you went to art school and everything. Did you see yourself as an artist or a writer? And was there one that you had to work on more to get sort of up to scratch?
Yeah, I feel like writing came naturally because I read so much, you know, and the art was a thing where, and I feel like writing just in general is a more efficient activity. I can do it faster, but with art, it just takes more practice and it takes more time, and so I think that's the thing I worked on the most. But then part of it too was like getting out of school. Like I can oil paint, I can watercolor, I can render photorealistically. But the truth of comic book storytelling is that if I was going to paint through like Alex Ross or some kind of like photorealistic painting, it would take me forever to tell a story. And I want to write a lot of stories. So I had to sort of figure out a balance of like there's an economy there of like how much time do I spend on the art to tell this story? Because if I spend 2 years making this one book, that's going to be one less story or one less book I get to write. So I sort of settled on like a style that was economical, that I feel like I can do quick enough that the art is good enough, you know, like to pull you through the story and tell the story, but it's not something you're going to like linger on every panel and be like, wow, what an amazing, rendering. Because I think 2 things. One is just economy. I have a lot of stories I want to tell and I want to get through them. And the other is I don't think with comics, the art and the story are hard to separate. And so if the art is so detailed and so intense that you're pausing to look at it, I feel like it's interrupting the flow of the narrative. So there's a balance there where you want enough that the reader's getting it, but you don't want too much where they're stopping and looking at it. I want people reading at a certain pace, and I think the art can control that to some degree. I don't know. There's some kind of science there I've tried to figure out, but there'll still be people that it's just like anything. Like, it's funny to hear. I watch a lot of like board game podcasts and people critiquing the art in board games, and it's so similar to comics in that like people like a certain kind of art, and it drives me crazy because I'm like, no, that's I don't know. And maybe coming from art school, I'm a little more pretentious when it comes to art and how I see it. But I think people want a certain kind of thing, and that's not necessarily what they need.
So your first game then is Scythe. And, talking about art in board games, this is a game that was born from the art. Jamie saw the art and designed a game around it. I mean, how well does the art send you on a journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what attracted me to it. That's one of the first games I stumbled across. It might be it was the second game I ever kickstarted. I think I kickstarted a Conan game because it looked cool, but Scythe was maybe the second thing I'd ever kickstarted, and it just looked amazing. And I hadn't seen that guy's art before, and I loved it. It kind of reminds me of Tales from the Loop. I don't know if you know that, his art. And then they did a whole TV show based on it, which I also really enjoyed. But I love that these visuals are so evocative that you can build sort of a narrative around it, and it's one of the Scythe to me is one of the few games where it's sort of telling you a story without like doing it in a heavy-handed way. It's like it's insinuating a story, or it's suggesting a story, but not like it doesn't get in the way of the game. The game is still really fun, but it feels like you're kind of in that world in a way that that's not like too heavy-handed, where you have to do a bunch of reading and there's all this world building, like artificial world building. It's like a video. Like, if you ever play a video game where it's like all these huge cut scenes where they're talking about story, and it's like, I'm just hitting the button. Let's go. I want to get to the game. The stories in most games aren't very good, honestly. And if I wanted to read a story, I would read it. I would read a book or a comic. I'm playing a game because I want to play a game. And if you can merge the game and the theme and the story all together, that's ideal. But I think you can go too heavy one way or the other. There can be games with no theme, and that's okay. But then if they're trying to shoehorn too much theme into it, then I don't like that either. It's a balance, I guess.
And when people criticize Scythe, often the critique they give it is they saw the mechs and all of this sort of stuff, and then they come to play the game, and it's a quite a sort of heavy economic Euro game. I mean, do you think the game and the art match well together? Yeah,
that's the thing I love most about it, is it kind of sucker punches you into, you see those mechs and it's like, you're like, oh, we're going to be rolling dice and shooting, and there's going to be terrain. Like, it's going to cost you more to move into those trees or something. And you get to the game, and the game is actually like sort of dissuading you from fighting. Like, you can fight, but fighting isn't probably your best option. And I don't think I've ever played a game like that where you have these things that look like they're ready to do battle, but it's actually detrimental to you most of the time to do battle. And I think that sort of unexpected twist, that's the part I like. Also, I like games where you have your own little board and you're trying to figure out the best process. Like, so it combines sort of two things I like in it, and the art's great. And I think, the criticism, I get it. There's games I don't like. The more I play games, it's funny. I'm so new to games still. I feel like that the more I play games, the more I'm starting to narrow down what kind of games I like, and I like the games where you have to figure out the most efficient process to get to the thing. not necessarily like fighting each other or that kind of tactical strategy, but more like, what order do I do things in? Which kind of reminds me of how I've been like in comics. In my process, I'm constantly refining it. I'm trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to write this story. What's the most efficient way to tell it, and then like when I'm scripting a story, I do an outline, and then I break it down into pages, and then write panel descriptions, and then I go through and do dialogue at the very end. And it took me a while to figure out like this is the best way. You don't just sit down and panel 1, page 1, describe it, and then put dialogue in it. You would just take forever. And then the same with the art. It's like there's a process there where you can be more efficient. And I'm trying to figure out what's the best way. Do I draw it all at once and then ink it all at once, and then you just constantly refining. And like games like Scythe to me are the same, where it's like, oh well, what's the most efficient way to do this? Do I pick that up and then do the thing, or and I think that there's something about that puzzle that I like in games, and in Scythe in particular.
So I want to move on now to talk about your work in the comic industry. So, round about 2003, you became a professional in the comic book world. I mean, how much of a sort of realizing of an ambition was it at the time, or did you not think about it like that at the time? It was just a matter of getting work done so you could pay the bills.
Yeah, no, I was doing graphic design as a day job, and so my goal was to always get published. And my wife always reminds me, like when we were in school, she's like, "Yeah, you always told me like your number one life goal was to just get one graphic novel published, and then whatever happens after that, that's as far as I'd ever planned, see if I could do it." So that was always like my goal, getting out of school, and so I did. I picked up graphic design skills on purpose so that I could, like worst case, I could self-publish my own books eventually. But I did like the other part of doing those mini comics that I don't show anybody is that it was practice. It was like I wanted to be good enough to be published, but I knew that I wasn't. I can look at my own work and be like, well, it's not quite there. It's not. There's something. It needs to be polished more. I need to figure some more things out. So I was never delusional about my ability or where I was as far as like publishability. I was like, none of these are ready, or I would have tried to submit them or try to get work. But I did. My first book, Pistol Whip, in 2000 was the first book I did where I was like, this is as good as I can do. I feel like I figured out a lot of things with storytelling. It's a complete book. I did the whole book. Finished it and designed the cover, had like 20 copies, so printed at Kinko's and then square bound and then made into things that look like real books. And then I took those to San Diego and a couple other conventions and just handed them out to editors. And I think they were confused because I was handing them a finished book, not just like pages or samples or trying to get work. And really, I was like, "Here's a book. I would like you to publish it." and I felt like that was the first time I've been doing comics, like making my own comics for like maybe 3 or 4 years, and that was the first one I thought, well, this is. I don't think it's it's not the best thing out there, but I think it's good enough. It's better than some things that I see published. So I was able to judge it critically and think like, well, this one has a chance. And then I got back from San Diego Comic-Con that year. This is like 2000. And like a week later, I got a call from or a message left by one of the publishers, Top Shelf, and they said they loved the book and wanted to publish it. I remember being in the kitchen listening to the voicemail and just like jumping up and down. I was like, yeah, I did it. And my wife was there, and that's a moment I'll never forget. It's one of those things. You set up these weird goals that you're like, maybe that'll work. Who knows? And then you hit that goal, and then you remember it. But then I'm also like, well, maybe I wonder if I should have set my sights higher. Like, should I have set a more lofty goal. I think that now, like 20 years later, I'm like, I wonder if I could have done something more if I had applied myself. But I set my goal at comic books, and here I am.
So you've worked for the big two, Marvel and DC, in your time. What was your experience of working with them?
It was mixed. I'll say that. Both Marvel and DC. In Marvel, I was sometimes left alone. I did a Spider-Man series with great artist Marco Rudy, and they just let us do whatever we wanted to do. And I wrote like 5 or 6 issues of that, and it was fun. And there were no notes and no editorial anything. They just let us run wild. And then I've done other books where I was getting notes on story that had nothing to do with the story. It was things related to like movies that were going to be coming out that I had no idea about, and things like that. And then I was like, well, these notes, they aren't making the story better. They're not helping this comic book. So I didn't like that. I was like, I like comic books. I want to make the best comic book stories. I don't care about the movie stuff. Like, what are we doing here? I don't. And so I've had both of those experiences, so I did it for a while because I thought, well, this is a good career move and it'll build an audience that will see my work, maybe like my writing, and then follow me to my creator-owned works. What I realized after a while was like, well, this is the writing that's coming out isn't my best stuff because it's not being allowed to be. Like the editorial is like not. It's like it's actually giving me bad writing habits, because now I'm trying to anticipate the dumb note I'm going to get. So I'm writing it that way first just to save time. And so that's why I stopped. I was like, I don't want to, this isn't healthy for me as a creator and my process, and so I just sort of stopped doing it because you can't really control. Some notes are good, some notes are bad, but you're really just like a little bit of just a worker on the line, kind of pumping out more product for these.
And I guess you're compelled to take the notes if you're given them, right?
Yeah, you have to, and you can push back a little bit. But I remember my worst note I ever got, and I'm a positive person, so I don't like telling the story. But the worst note I ever got was on the story, and I won't say I won't mention any names or titles or anything. But I had pitched the idea, which is one of my favorite things. And the note I got on the phone was, well, this doesn't, this idea only works in comic books. And I was like, why? I didn't understand that note. And then I realized, because they were thinking about movies and animation and how it would be too expensive to do in those other formats. And that was the moment I was like, I can't do this anymore. That might be the worst note I've ever gotten, and I'll never forget it. But yeah, I was like, the beauty of comic books is we can do anything. There is no budget, and there's no the limit is your imagination, and that's what drew me into comic books. Is if you can write and draw it, it can happen, and then nobody else is interfering. You don't have to. There's not a committee of people. And I think early on when I was still in school, I thought, well, maybe I'll be a filmmaker because I love photography and I love movies and writing. And it's a visual medium with storytelling. And I was thinking about doing that. And then I realized that if I wanted to make a movie, I can't be the photographer and the writer and do all of the parts. All these other people have to be involved, and then so much more money and all these different things that sort of affect the final product. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I want to control the story. And I felt like comics was the perfect medium. Then I was like, well, I'll do this. Then I can just sit in my room and create it exactly how I want it to be without any interference. It doesn't cost any money. It costs the ink and paper that I'm using, and it was just so much more satisfying.
And so you often don't do the art in books. You just work as a writer. How different is that process?
It's definitely different, and I feel like the older I've gotten, the better I've gotten at it, and because you're definitely collaborating with an artist, and then it's one thing to dictate to an artist what to draw, and I don't like to do that. So what I've done over the years is sort of develop relationships with a handful of artists who I've become friends with, and so we sort of collaborate it more instinctually. It's like, well, what kind of things do you feel like drawing? Maybe that'll give me a story idea, and it sort of grows more organically that way. Because when you're writing things for like Marvel and DC, you really are. You never talk to the artist. You turn in a script and then they draw what you say, and it's kind of like a disconnected. And I don't really like that, because I feel like I'm taking however many days it takes me to write this script, and the artist is drawing on it for like 6 weeks, and I feel like that's not fair. so I really do. I try to include the artist in the story as much as I can. And I'm still kind of a control freak, so the story is going to be my story, but visually I'm open to ideas, and I think if you close yourself off to ideas, why would you do that? I'm always looking for like a better idea or a refinement on something. So the artists I work with now, it's great, because they come up with ideas, and I'm like, oh, that's good, or that's funny, let's do it, or and we can just kind of go back and forth a little bit. But yeah, I think I prefer drawing everything, but ultimately it is the economy of I really have like a folder full of story ideas that I want to write. I can't draw them all because it will take too long. So if I can work with artists to get those stories out, that's the most important thing for me, is storytelling. So the more stories I can tell, the better. And working with artists is the way to do it. That's what I do.
And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you worked recently with Keanu Reeves on Berserker. So how did you get that gig?
I don't know. I was working with a publisher who had published. I did a book, Grass Kings, that was pretty well received, and then I did another book, Black Badge, with both creator-owned books with an artist. I work with Tyler Jenkins, and who I'm still working with today. He's one of the artists I was talking about, where we get along, we're friends, and it's fun to work together. But I guess what had happened was the publisher had a meeting with Keanu, and about something else, and then they asked him if he had any comic book ideas, and he's like, well, yeah, I got one. And he pitched them their idea, and they're like, that's great. And but he hadn't written a comic book before, and so they wanted to pair him with a writer. And so they called me, and they're like, hey, Keanu has this idea, would you be interested in co-writing it? And I was like, well, what's the idea? And they're like, well, it's in sort of like an immortal, eternal warrior type of character who can't die and lives forever. And I was like, well, I've heard that before. I was like, what's the twist? They're like, well, we'll come out to LA, let him pitch it to you, and there's more to it, but let him. He pitches it well and everything. Let him tell you. And I was like, well, okay. And then I really didn't. I was like, I don't want to be I was just wary of the whole thing, right? I didn't want to be writing a book that a person's just putting their name on to like brand it or something. And so I took the meeting, because I thought, well, worst case, I can tell my daughter, I'd be like, hey, guess who I'm meeting today? And she's like, who is it? I was like, Keanu. She's like, oh, from Midsummer's Night Dream, which she had just seen in high school. That's all she knew him from. That was
not the film I would have thought that she was going to say.
I know. It's like,
I mean, for me, it would be Bill and Ted, but
no, she didn't. But she was too young for Matrix, and she wasn't born when Bill and Ted came out. So it was just in that weird window where that's where she knew him from. And I'm like, that's amazing. And so I went out, took the meeting. He pitched the idea. There was definitely, he had like a nice, fun little twist on like this idea that I really liked. And he was really animated about it, and really like invested in the story, and wanted to wanted to really co-write it. And I was like, okay, if this is what it is, then we'll do it. You know, if it's not just me having this one meeting and I'm going back and writing it all by myself, I don't want to do that, because I can do that on my own. That doesn't sound like fun. But yeah, so we did. This is like 2.5 years ago, and we're literally just finishing issue 12. It was due today. I didn't get it done, so but I'm doing this instead.
And so, well, you've bumped Keanu for me. I feel privileged.
I can't tell you. I will tell you, I was so excited when you invited me on the show, because I've done like tons of like comic book related podcasts and different things, and I've never done a board game one. Board games is like my number one hobby. So I was like so excited. I've been excited all week, to be honest, just to talk board games. So let's get through the comic book stuff. Let's talk about games.
And so how was Keanu to work with you? So, you know, I'm sure people who knew nothing about it just thought, you know, you did all the work, Keanu put his name to it. But from the way you're talking, that's not the case. It was a true collaboration. Yeah, no, I wouldn't have done it. I would have just not done it if it was going to be him just putting a name on it, you know, and it's, because I just, there's so many reasons not to do that, you know. It's like, cause I'm at a place, I don't need to do books for the money. I didn't need the work. I wanted to do something that sounded like fun, you know, and what sounds like fun is like sitting in a room with Keanu and brainstorming story ideas, you know. That's not something I would have ever predicted. And we got along really well. I think that's part of it, was we just kind of clicked. And I wasn't like a weird, like super fan of his or something, you know. I love his work and respect him and everything, but it wasn't like, I don't know. I just felt like we were equals as collaborators, you know, and so sitting in a room and spitballing and working ideas. I've described it, having done it for 2 years, and then him not really being like a writer. Like the way we ended up writing was we sort of fell into like role playing mode. So like he would be the main character, the immortal character, and then I'm kind of like there's like a doctor, scientist lady, and then sort of like this creepy cult leader, and I would play those characters. So we would plot the thing out together, and then we would sort of workshop the scenes, almost like improvising, you know, shooting dialogue back and forth and building the scenes like that. And I would just be typing it all down, you know, as we were doing it. And so it was kind of like playing a role-playing game in a way, but it ends up being a comic book. And I think that's one of the reasons why I haven't gotten into role-playing games very much, is because I feel like that feels like my job too much. like I was like, if we're doing this, I should probably I feel like typing it down and making it out of it. What are we doing here? Like we're just making the story, and then it evaporates into the ether. I don't really, we need to record this. So your next game then is one of my favorites, and this is Modern Art. Why does this game work so well?
I think there's two reasons. One is coming from from art school. And then there was a point in my career too, where I was like, well, am I going to be a fine artist? Like they're pushing me to do that. They don't want me to do comic books or anything commercial. They want me to do fine art. And then you look at the fine art world, and I was like, I don't want to talk about social engagement and network. I was like, I just want to work alone and be alone. But with fine art, you really have to like engage with people and network and sort of put yourself out there. And it did not appeal to me at all. But so then there's the aspect of the game that's just manipulation of the art market, you know, and sort of creating like this false, not necessarily false, but like false scarcity or fear of missing out, or like, oh man, I got to get this artist is hot. We got to start buying them up. I love sort of that meta aspect of the game. Like I feel like the theme fits the game in a way where you're pumping up an artist, pumping it up so you can dump it, you know, or like it's just kind of fun. And depending on the group you're playing with, it can be really animated and people getting into it. And then especially when like an auction starts to go off the rails and people are just overbidding, it's just so fun to me.
I mean, and part of the reason I really enjoy this game is because I've got a big mouth,
Yeah.
and I like sort of dominating the table and sort of compelling people to buy my rubbish. Yeah. And, I've spoken to you now for sort of half an hour, and you seem quite a sort of quiet, reserved guy. Do you transform at the table and become this sort of WWE wrestler with a huge mouth?
Yeah, no, I don't get loud, but what I'll do is I'll get descriptive. There's a couple different versions of the game too. So there's I actually know like the fake artists in the main game, Secret Sailor, and I'll come up with stories for them, or I'll describe the paintings and try to sell the painting, not pushy, just like talk about how great this one is. Look at the way you use color here, just to add flavor. But it's more just to be funny and entertaining. Yeah, no, I do like that. The games do bring it out of me a little bit, where I'm trying to think of a game I get animated in. I tend not to like those kind, unless it's like some of the social games, like the werewolf games or whatever. You can't play those without being like that, but those aren't my favorite.
And so the thing about Knizia, I've been into gaming now for about a decade, but I really discovered Knizia a couple of years ago, and I'm constantly blown away by how efficient his games are, how simple they are, and yet how deep they are. That's his real sort of USP. Do you think that sort of credo of simplicity married with depth is good advice for people working in all forms of art?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. To me, it's the frustrating thing about his games, but not in a bad way. He forces you to find a balance, and like one of the games is it Tigris and Euphrates? Did he do that one where you only score your lowest, whatever the amount of cubes you have, you score.
That's the classic Knizia thing. You score your lowest thing.
Yeah, he does that all the time, and I'm like, oh, I hate that, because it forces you to like. I really just want to pick one thing I'm good at and max out on it. You can never do that with his games, and so that I do like that about it, because it does force you to. It is. I mean, there's a real life equivalent to that, where it's like with work-life balance, and like working in comics, like it's, I've been doing this like full time for so long, like all I do is work, like I have to force myself to take 2 days off, for the weekend. I don't always do that. And then having a kid and sort of trying to find that balance, there's something real about that, about, you're only as strong as the weakest thing you're doing, and I sort of like that about it. But it's also the thing that I'm terrible at Tigris and Euphrates. I don't understand how the battling works. I can't ever do it right. So I'm not very good at it, but, yeah. And I'm not good at it in life either. Like I work way too much.
So I want to talk now about mind management. And so I recently bought a copy of this in anticipation of interviewing you, so I'd sort of have a handle on what it is. And the minute I saw the talking dolphins, I thought, this feels to me like the Illuminatus trilogy. Did those books influence mind management at all?
Yeah, what's funny is the first book had come out, and then a friend of mine, Brian, who I shared the studio with, he's like, hey, you should probably read these books. They gave me the first one, or maybe loaned it to me. I ended up just keeping it, and I read the first half of it, and it made me uncomfortable. I was like, oh, it's sort of treading on a lot of things that I want to do or I'm doing, and so I kind of stopped reading it because it was too close. But I enjoyed it, and I get it. And I can't say that I remember too much of it now, but I remember reading most of it at the time. And I was like, yeah, this is good. I like it. And I get that people mention that book all the time. And, yeah, I think there's something there that's sort of like is in harmony with the stuff I'm doing.
I mean, it's interesting because we've seen with QAnon and stuff a sort of real life conspiracy theory happen in real time. And I got completely sort of hooked on researching it because I find conspiracy theories so fascinating. What is it about the idea of a conspiracy theory, do you think, that enraptures people?
Yeah, I will say, like, it's made me more uncomfortable with my own work. It's like, as the years go on, I'm like, and then you start to see, man, you just start to see these things that I feel like were fun thought experiments becoming real. And so I don't like it quite as much. But I remember I was in high school and I had this great American history teacher, and he was obsessed with the Kennedy assassination. So like we would go through all of American history, but it would be like a whole extra week just on the 60s, you know, and Kennedy, and then he would go into the Oswald and all the grassy knoll and all it sort of sparked something in me. I was like, wow, we don't really know, you know, and it's this idea of like, this thing happened, this big event happens, and you don't necessarily know why or what exactly happened, and there's all these questions being raised, and it sort of sparked that in me when I was younger. So I became obsessed with Kennedy and the assassination and like what really happened, and sort of researching that. And the funny thing happened is, like, the older I got, the more I read, and then there'd always be a new book coming out with some new theory, and Oliver Stone's movie came out. But I feel like the older I got, the more I realized, and you look at history and events, I started to become like, not jaded, but I just more pragmatic, I think, about conspiracies. And like, you know what? I was like, I think Oswald, he had a really good day at the shooting range. I think he got really lucky, and I think sometimes weird things happen. You know, you know, you'll flip a coin a million times and it'll land on its edge one time, and there's nothing more to it than that's what happened. You know? And so I don't. But here's the twist on that is that not always. So like, if there are 100 conspiracy theories, two of them are real, you know, and 98 of them are, you know, it's probably like the simplest explanation is what happened.
Paul McCartney really did die in 1966.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of it.
Right, and then this old guy is still making money somehow. I don't know. Who is that?
And so when reading Mind Management, I was really struck because, you know, I'm not someone who... I've read a fair amount of graphic novels, but I'm not really a comic book person. And when people think of comic books, they think, you know, of athletes with incredible bodies and skin tight suits. And what's really strikes me in Mind Management is how the characters are sort of normal, schlubby people. Was this a conscious decision to make them sort of people you could see on the street every day?
Yeah, I grew up with reading superhero comics, all that stuff you were describing. And I felt like as I got older, especially, and I don't want to put more superhero books into the world. We have enough of them. You know, if you don't want the books, we got the movies. You know, it's all fine. They're all entertaining. Like, I love that stuff, especially when I was younger. But I don't, as a creator making things to put into the world, I don't want to put more of that. I'm trying to do something different. You know, try to find a new way or a new thing or a different angle. And everything, not just like the design of the thing, the way it looks, the art, my process, and then the characters. Like, I wanted the characters to not be, not feel like they have like superpowers, you know, and I never use the word powers in the book. It's always abilities, or they're being trained, or they're using their mind. And it's to me, I always felt like I wanted to keep it as grounded as I could, so that everything in the book is based on, it's like our world, our reality, but like turned up maybe 20%, probably more than that. But the thing was, I was drawing the book, then I was writing the book, and that was my thought going in, like, I'm going to keep it grounded. When I started drawing it, I realized it's really boring to just draw like normal people in clothes, schlubby people walking around using mind powers that you can't see, you know, like, how do you make that visual? So I did realize, I can make it visual, like show their mind's eye, you know, or like what they're what it feels like to them, and so it allowed me to have a little more latitude in what I show. Like the vision of the main character Maru, who's really her powers are not visual at all. There's no like physical thing to it at all. So I was like, well, that's really boring to look at. This is a visual medium. So I figured out ways to show like how she visualizes herself. So she'll look normal, and then she'd sort of like her visual version, her image of herself is something else. It's like a little more fantastical, and then it became more fun to draw. So it was a fine line between like keeping it grounded, but making it fun to look at and fun to draw. And it sort of pushed me to figure out how to make this book fun to look at, or interesting to look at. And so hiding secret messages in there and subliminal things all through the book was my way of sort of, I wanted you to flip through the book and it kind of looks like, it's normal things happening. But if you look at it again, like, I don't notice that text on the edge. Now I'm reading it. What is this saying?
So I have to confess this. I've made a decision that I'm going to read the book through and then I'm going to go back and read the text around the edge because I started to do it and it started to distract me. Am I doing it wrong, or is that okay?
There's no wrong way, but I would say that is the correct way to do it. If you're going to pick a way, because again, I don't want it to distract. It completely disrupts the flow of the narrative. If you're stopping to read that text every time, I would do like it reminds me of, I read the book From Hell, Alan Moore's From Hell with Eddie Campbell, and the footnotes in that book are just as good as the book. Like all the research he did and the theories and why he chose the things he chose. And so when I read From Hell, I read a chapter at a time, and then I read the notes at the back, read another chapter, read the notes. And so I would do that. I would read an issue and then go back and read the text, or read the next chapter, read the text. It's probably how I do it because it's still fresh in your mind. You don't have to remember every piece of text on the edge is key to something happening on the page. So it might be better to do it that way, but who am I to tell you? You could also skip all the text and you'll still get the story.
And so I was looking at it and I was thinking, what is it about this art that looks different? And as I say, I'm not a big comic book person, so I don't know a lot about it. But I noticed, this is watercolor art. You're using washes for the background and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, what does that do to enhance the story? Why did you make that decision?
One is just a practical reason. Watercolor is very fast. So when I did Mind Management, I was doing it monthly as a monthly comic book. So I was writing and drawing, inking, painting, lettering, designing the book every month. So part of it was just the economy of like, how can I color this whole book and get it all done in time? Because I literally in comics history, I'm the only person that's ever done 3 years of monthly comic where I did every single piece of it for that long. And I look at it now and I'm like, I could never do it now. I'm too old. I don't have the energy to do it. And when I was done, it really burned me out when I was done. But so part of it was just the economy of like watercolor is quick for me. And then the other part of it is just like it makes it look different. Most comics now are colored on the computer, or they're made to look like they're not. But there's always sort of something artificial or too polished about it. Where for me, watercolor, there's inherent like flaws in how the paint pools or the water dries, and it sort of adds another layer of like randomness or like organicness to it. And within that, then it allows me to sort of like, even within my art, it's purposely designed to be messy. It's not perfect. There's like dirt and specks and junk all over the art half the time. And for me, they're purposeful design flaws built into it so that when I put something meaningful in there, it sort of blends in. So there's paintings. There's a cover I did where like it's a little guy and big explosion, and in the explosion it's just all watercolor and washes and things. But there's like think there's like two words hidden in there that I just like painted in there because it just goes with paint and you can't tell and no one's going to notice. And you turn upside down like, hey, there's a secret message. So to me, it allowed me to just make a book that doesn't look like anything else, and then also add a degree of paranoia to the entire experience. So when you're looking at it, is that a mistake, or is that a thing I put there on purpose? And I would say like 90% of the time it's on purpose. 10% of the time it's just something I messed up, but it blends in.
And so the reason we're talking, and the reason, loads of board gamers in the last couple of months have suddenly rushed to comic book shops and Amazon and bought Mind Management is because of the board game. So how excited were you at the prospect of it becoming a game?
I was really, it's funny, I was so ignorant of the process. That first year I went to Gen Con, I guess 5 years ago, I was tagging along with my friend and I bumped into Jay Cormier, who's half the team. Sen is the other half who ended up designing the game. But I bumped into him while he was talking to my friend, and then he introduced me, and then Jay was like, "Oh, he's like, you do my management. I'm a huge fan." I was like, "That's great." It was cool that he knew the books, and then I was like, "We should do a board game sometime." This is like I didn't know anything about board games. Just what I'd seen literally like a couple of hours ago. And he's like, "Yeah, we should." And so by the time I got home from that con, I was like addicted to board games, and then he followed up, and I was like, "Let's do it." And then I'd been playing a bunch of games, and I had some ideas for some games, like a concept for how to adapt it. And then none of my ideas were any good because they're just not good. They're fun ideas. I'm like, well, this will work. But then when you play the thing, it's like, no, it's terrible. There was one of my favorite ideas was this idea where you're playing on the board, whatever the main game is, but then the side game is everybody has a secret mission that they have to complete, which is outside of the game, which is having another person at the table do something, like either get them a glass of water or say a specific word during the game. And if you do that, then boom, you get extra points. You flip your card over. I'm like, you got me water when I asked. And now I get whatever. So you're trying to manipulate people in the real world while you're playing the game. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. What a great idea. I've never played a game like that. And then they actually play tested it, and then people just shut down. They were playing the game and they just wouldn't talk to each other or interact. And it was like the worst.
I'm not giving that bastard points.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I didn't. It's like these unintended consequences of this. And what I did like was that it made everybody really paranoid. But that doesn't translate to like a fun game experience. So that was like one of the early versions that failed. But yeah, so at that point I was like, hey, you guys, I'm going to let you guys come up with the mechanics of it. And then when you're done with the mechanics, like explain it to me. And then let's just treat it like we have unlimited budget for art, and I'll just do all the art. We'll jam it full of as much as we can and make it like as crazy and cool looking as we can. And I can do that part, and if I can help tell a story or do something that interacts or like integrates with the mechanics of it, even better. And so it was great because they knew the books. So they were able to make mechanics that sort of dovetailed with the theme. And then I was able to put more theme that dovetailed with the mechanics they were doing. And we just like truly collaborated on making it work.
And how different was creating the art for a game as opposed to creating the art for a book?
It was so hard. It was so hard. Like just the board itself. Like I went through so many versions of it, and it's such a big piece of art, but it's also a very functional piece. Where in comics, like I can do a big piece of art, or I can do a story where it functions and it just has to tell the story, but you're not using that work of art to do anything else. Where with the actual board, the icons had to be clearly visible, and they had to be unique, and they had to be placed in certain ways, and the things on the edge of the board, and and uh, it was so much control, so many little tweaks I had to do to make it work, and it was definitely the most not fun part of doing any like art related thing I've ever done, because of the function. I've never had to do, like, if you read my book and you miss like 10% of it, or you're like, oh, I feel like I missed something, that's okay. It's still entertaining. But with the board game and the board functioning, it has to work 100%. If it only works 90% and you can't find an icon or something's confusing, the game's broken. So there was a lot of pressure to get that right. But once the actual physical board was nailed down, everything else was a little bit easier. And there's a lot of the cards and there's little boxes with all the mini comics that go inside. And that was where I was like, oh, now you can just let me run wild, and there's new little pieces that you open up every time you play a game. And then there's a little mini comic that comes with it. And so it was fun for me to come up with a little mini narrative that sort of explained what mind management is and built the world a little bit, but also like was themed to the little pieces you're getting, and it sort of explains a lot of the stuff, and let me do little mini comics, which were super fun to draw, and it put a lot of good little pieces in the game that I really wanted to have, because I feel like it's interesting. Being relatively new to games is this debate people have about like what the game looks like and the pieces and the production of the game compared to like things being overproduced or things looking too fancy or too much. And I don't get it. As a visual person and as a person who loves tactile experiences, I feel like the cooler it looks, the better the things are, the neater it is. As long as the game works, as long as the game is fun, like it just makes it twice as good. It's like, it's kind of like comic books in that if you pick up a book and then you flip through and the art's it's okay, like, maybe you'll read it or maybe you won't. But if the art's amazing, you're going to give it a chance to be like, oh, and sometimes you pick up a book, the art's amazing, the story's horrible, and then the book's no good. But if you pick up a book where the art is amazing and the story is amazing, that's like your favorite book, And I feel like with games, it's similar to me, where like if the pieces and the design and how it feels and how it looks, if all that's amazing and it's fun to play, those are the best games to me. And that's why like Scythe is one of those where like it looks amazing, and it's really fun to play. So it sort of hits both of those.
So your next game then is Mexica. And is this your favorite one of the Mask trilogy?
Yeah, I think we one time played, and I didn't know there's a trilogy. My brother was, this is another part of the story too, is like my brother, I'm going to back up a little bit and hit this as long as we have time. But when I was getting into comic books, I never had a video game machine, because I knew that I would go to my brother's and we'd play his Xbox or play Halo, and I would play till 3 a.m. Like I was addicted to video games. I was like, I can't own a video game machine. So I made my wife promise to never let me buy one. And then because I knew I'd never get my comics done, because those hours need to be work hours. So I would go to my brother's, but when I would go to my brother's on the weekends, I'm like, come on, let's play some Xbox. And he'd be like, well, he really was into board games. He's like, let's play a board game first. And I was like, oh, no. But I would play. He made me play like Catan and I'm trying to think what other one, Carcassonne. And so I'd suffer through a couple games of that just to get to the Xbox, and then we play Halo all night. So flash forward, and now I'm doing comics for a career. I have video game, I have PlayStation or whatever. That's under control. And I'm just addicted to board games. I forgot where I was going with this. Dang it.
The Mask trilogy.
Yeah. So the Mask trilogy. So one of those times I came over and he was like, hey, we're going to play I want to play. There's this trilogy. I was like, what? Why are we playing? I don't want. We have to play 3 games, and then so we did. We spent the day and we played like all 3 of them in a row. And we played Mexico last, I think, or because what is it? It's Tikal, one of them, right, with the layered tiles. I'm trying to remember what the other 2 were, but we played Mexico last, and it was so fun, and we were so mean to each other. Like you can be. I don't know. There's something about that, and I love the feel of those buildings you put down. They're made out of whatever that is, and the way you can every time you play it, you're placing the rivers and the water down, and you're transforming the board every time. So it was different every time. And what I realized about that game, and this to me, this is one of the things I thought about too, is what ends up being my favorite games are the games that my friends want to play, because those are the ones they're enjoying it. So like if they're having fun playing the game, I like that game more, even if it's not my favorite. Mexico is one of those where I get it out and we play a couple times, and then my friends, you start to get it, and then you play again, and now people are playing differently, or somebody really screwed you with how they put the water down, or how they waited to the last minute to build their buildings, or they saved up all their action points. That's my favorite thing to do is save all the extra action points and then play at the very end. So you do that. And then what I saw was that the game began to evolve. The game didn't evolve, but how we played it made it evolve. And so we ended up playing based on how the last game went. You know, like, oh, you did that last time. Well, I'm not going to let you do that this time. And so the gameplay evolved in a way that I hadn't seen in any of the other games we play. You sort of figure out a system and do a thing or try a different strategy. But with Mexico, you're really like interacting and building around each other. And there was a lot of variability there where you can put the water down in such crazy ways. I can't tell you, like the way we play now, if somebody new came to the game and played it, they'd be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you playing this way? It makes no sense, but it does based on the narrative of how we played every time before then.
And so part of the reason I've avoided these games is because my spatial awareness is terrible.
Yeah.
Do you need good spatial awareness to be good at this game? And is that part of the reason that you love it?
Yeah, no, I'm terrible at spatial games. The irony of you would think like doing art and being a designer, and you would think I would be good at it. I'm really bad at spatial games. I don't like any abstract games where you have to lay tiles down or do things. I can't do it. I can't do it. But Mexico to me is even though I'm not good at it, let's be clear, I'm not good at any of the games I'm talking about. But I enjoy the process, and I enjoy the learning of it. But yeah, I think you do. Some games you need more spatial awareness than others. And my wife, I find out, is very good at spatial things. So she's really good at those kind of games. But yeah, I'm not good at it. And none of the games I pick are because I'm good at any of them. I'm really not good at any of these games. And I'm not competitive either. When we play, I'm competitive in real life. And like, if I play a sport or something, I'm competitive. In board games, there's something that just like, I'm just not at all. It doesn't matter. I try to win, and it does not matter at all if I win or lose. I don't care. Like, to me, it's more about like fun moments in the game, or everybody's having a good time and I'm trying to win, but I don't really care. And I care in a joking way. Like every game I have has the score and the winner written in the box in the lid. So it's like a record of like when we played it and who played it and who won. And so every time we play, I'm like, if it's our first game, I'm like, this one doesn't go in the box because it's practice. Nobody knows how to play it. And then, but then the rule is if everybody's played but one person, and that one person that has never played wins, then it goes in the box with an asterisk, So I keep like joking score, but I don't. I also don't think what's interesting to me about the thing I like about games is that the thing I enjoy most is learning the game, which is the thing I used to hate. I'd go to my brother's and he would be teaching me, and I'm just like in a daze. And then now, the thing I like most is figuring out how they work, or seeing what the mechanic is, or seeing the new, deciphering the rule book and playing through it and seeing how it works. Like once I've figured out how the game plays and what the rules are, I honestly, I don't even want to play it as much. I'd rather play a new one just to learn how it works.
So I want to talk now broadly about sort of comics as an art form. So firstly, what does the medium offer that conventional prose doesn't?
I don't know. Less probably. More pictures, less depth, I think. I don't mean that as a knock on comics. I just think having written prose, having written screenplays, there's definitely strengths and weaknesses to every medium. And with comics, the strength is that they're accessible. You can tell a story visually in a way that is satisfying to look at, where a person can stop and like enjoy the art or a moment. Where in movies they're visual, but the moments are happening so quickly back to back that there's no time to really reflect on it. Where with comics, you can take your time. The reader has ability to control the pace a little more. And then there's like a physical artifact there where you can look at it and just kind of enjoy it and explore the book. I think with comic books, there's more license to have fun with the design of the thing. Like with mind management, a few novels do this. House of Leaves is one that sort of plays with the idea of typography and layout of the book, tell the story, but rarely does prose do it. But with comics, you have more license to have fun with the design, and with mind management, I did like fake ads in the back of the book that sort of tied into the story, and you can do things with format and color and things that you can't do in another medium. So it has that advantage. But I think to me, the disadvantages are you get less depth of character. You can't do as much dialogue, because if you did a bunch of dialogue in a comic, it would be super boring to read. You might as well be prose. So you have to sort of strike that balance of art and words put together. If you have a bunch of text pages in there, it slows the reader down. And I feel like mixing too much text with comics makes it kind of a slog to read through. And so you can't really do it, I don't think, and have like a fun reading experience. So there's a balance there. And having written all of those kinds of things, they're all fun. But I really like drawing. So like I'll never not do comics, because you can't draw in those other mediums.
And on that, I mean, I love to write. And if you were being charitable to my writing, you'd call it verbose. And so what I noticed about reading comics is how sparse, sort of how crystalline and efficient the text is. How difficult is that? And to what extent do you sort of pare loads and loads away before you get to the finished piece?
Yeah, well, goes back to the process too. Like refining my process over the years. I used to write out full scripts for myself, and I would have panel descriptions and lots of dialogue. And as I've streamlined my process, I realized that the way I work, and I don't know how other people do it, but I come up with all the action first, like everything that's happening that you're visually going to see. I just write all that out, and then I go back, do a pass of dialogue and words or captions if there's captions, and I do that over the top of the art, because what the other strength of comics to me, and the thing I have the most fun with probably is telling you one thing, showing you something else. And that's something where movies can kind of do it, but not really. And prose can't do it at all, is show you a thing. Like you see a person doing a thing, but then the caption is telling you something else, that they're thinking something else or they're doing something else. That contrast of where you can have sort of like irony in every panel, if you want, is the thing I have the most fun with, is either making the words and the pictures sync up So it's almost like a harmony of word and picture where they tie together or they add to each other, or like dissonance between what you're reading and what you're seeing. I did my favorite example of mine of doing this is like the most extreme example was this book and record I did. It was a mind management book and record. And I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, we had little 45 records and it would come with a comic book, and you would play the record and the record would have voices. It was like a audio version of the comic, and you'd ding when you turn the page and you'd read along with it. So I always wanted to do a mind management version of that where you're reading along with this record that you're listening to. But then it starts to sort of splinter. So like what you're hearing and what you're reading are complete or different versions of the same story. So you're reading one thing and you're seeing the thing, but the audio is not. Audio is something else. But it's like, oh, so it adds another level of meaning, and it changes the meaning of what you're actually looking at and reading, and you're realizing, oh, this guy is not exactly what he's telling you he is. This is something else going on here. And so I think that's something you can't really do. You couldn't have done any other way. And I think that's what attracts me to board games or doing a book and a record or a comic or even a screenplay. The stuff I've been writing is like trying to figure out ways, how do you use the medium, the tools it has, the things that are unique to it. How do you use that to tell like a story that couldn't be told any other way? And so that's kind of what I've been trying to do with everything I've been working on.
And so if someone's listening to this thinking, I know nothing about comics, I've never read a graphic novel in my life, but listening to this, I'd like to sort of dip my toe in. What would be some of the sort of graphic novels, some of the comics that you would recommend people to sort of introduce them to the world?
Boy, that's a tough one. I don't know. I wouldn't start with mind management. How's that? Don't start there. That's a little bit of the deep end, I think, as far as it goes. But starter comics. I'm trying to think of what. This always puts me on the spot because I've read so much and my studio's full of books over the years. And it's like, do you pick something old, something new? If you haven't, Watchmen is like one of those that shows you exactly how great comics can be. Still good after all these years, but it's also, I don't know if that's a starter one. If you've never read a comic, I don't know about that. That's a good question. Let's come back to that one. Let me think about it a minute.
No problem. So your next game then is Hive. And of all the sort of abstract games out there, why this abstract game?
That's the one on my list. I looked at it, I was like, why? I wonder why I put that one. I think my wife and I play it. She enjoys it. And it is a game to me that it's one of those evolving games where every time you play it, you kind of, if you play it 3 times in a row, you don't do the same thing 3 times in a row. You can't do it. If you try to do it, the other person will remember because you just did that thing. Like you're not doing that again. So I do think that that's like a very short game. I have like the travel version so we can walk up and get coffee and play it. And I like that. I think I like the games I tend to like the most are the ones that I can get people to play the most. And the games that we play the most of those, the best ones are the ones where they sort of evolve with every play and depending on what we did last time. And I think there's just something fascinating about that it changes the game. The problem with the games like that is that if you're introducing a new person to a game like that, you're so far ahead of them that they'll never catch up in a way. So it's kind of, you end up only playing that game with certain people because you've evolved in your gameplay of it. It's almost like chess. Like if you've memorized all the chess moves, you're not going to play with somebody who's just learning. It's going to be zero fun. So there's an element of that to it that's a little bit of a bummer. But there's so many new games coming out all the time. I don't have that problem.
And so you've mentioned you play with your wife. Has she evolved with you as a gamer? Is she as into it as you are, or are you the one that really pushes the hobby?
Yeah, no, she's she thinks I've lost my mind. She'll play. What's been great about her is she's not super into games. She likes her favorite games are Rummy Cube, which I love, and Jaipur, which we've probably played that more than any other game. But I would have picked that as my game to take, but we've played it so much. I was like, I don't know if I need to play it anymore. But we play that the most. She likes that, and Hive she likes. And then, so for me, it's fun to sort of like get a game that I think she'll like. I'm like, based on this, I wonder if she'll like this one, and slowly like baby step her into something more bigger, or heavier. But then I could tell when I've gone too far. I would take one step too far, and it's like, nope, not this one. It's like, we'll backtrack a little bit. Too many rules on the individual cards that we can't do it. She doesn't want to. You know what I mean? Something like Magic or something, which I haven't played Magic, but I've played other like games like that, like the Lord of the Rings game and the games with all the living card games. We play those. There's no way. There's too much there.
And so it seems to me that what you've mentioned, it seems to me that you are someone who appreciates things that work on many different levels. Is that part of the thing that appeals to you about gaming, that there is a meta and there is an ownership in gaming that particular game groups have over games?
Yeah, I do. I think it's definitely the tactile thing to it that I enjoy all the levels of it. Like Hive, to me, if Hive was just like cardboard tiles you put down, I wouldn't like it. Because they're not, the little pieces aren't clacking together, and they're not heavy. And like I don't like playing the whatever, what are they called? The words escaping me. What the preliminary games before you make it, like the
gateway games.
No, not like when we were testing mind management, it would just be like printed out stuff.
Oh, prototypes.
The prototypes, yeah. So I can't stand playing prototypes of games because it's like, I was like, I know this looks fun. It's probably fun, but it's just on pieces of paper. And in mind management, it was when I would play the prototype. I was like, I don't like this. Is this any good? I don't know. Like people were liking it, like people that know games and play prototypes all the time. They don't mind, but I was like, this game needs to be better. I think I tried to overdo it on the art and how much we put in, because I'm like, I want it to be, I want it to be as cool as it can be. But yeah, anytime what's funny is I sort of got into board games and then I've sort of backed into it or came at it sideways. So I have a lot of friends that design games, for a living, and then I play with them and they're always wanting to break out a prototype of something. I'm like, oh.
It's the same with every gamer. You go to Game Group, you play a game, and then someone sits there and goes, would you like to play my prototype? And everyone's face sinks.
Everybody's looking at their watch. Like, oh. Yeah, no, but I think, some of them, I'm sure there's somebody who would love to try this prototype of this new game, but not me.
So I want to talk now about the future. So what can we expect from you in the future in terms of comics, but also in terms of more forays into the board game world? Yeah,
well, comics, Dark Horse has been a great publisher I've worked with for almost my whole career. And we launched a new, or they gave me an imprint. So it's just all my books. I'm writing everything and I'm drawing some of them, working with a lot of the same people I've always collaborated with. And there's not much difference between that and what I've been doing, but they've given me total creative control of everything, including the production of the books, the design of the books, which I tend to have anyway, but I really wanted to push things. I guess as I get older, I'm getting bored. I don't like doing things the same way every time. So we're doing some slightly different formats, like with paper and size. And one of the books is going to have fur for a cover. It's about an evil cat. So I'm trying to make the books similar to what we were talking about with games. Is you can read a comic on your iPad now and it looks amazing. Like the colors are so bright and just juicy looking. Like why are we cutting down trees and wasting ink and shipping these books. Like, why are we wasting all these resources to have a book? So for me, if it's going to be a physical book, there needs to be a good reason for it, and there needs to be. I want that book to have a presence on your shelf, and I want it to be something you don't just read and throw in the recycle bin or send to. You know what I mean? I want it to be something where you look at it, and then every time you see the book, when you go buy it on the shelf, you're like, oh yeah, like it gives you kind of remember it a little bit, or it gives you that feeling. Like I have tons of books, and I love them because to me, they're a record of where places I've been, or ideas, and art, and just walking by them is exciting. So that's sort of the concept for these books, is to make them things that there's a reason they're printed, there's rather than just like, because that's how we've always done it. I want these books to be like tactile objects that you can enjoy. Just like the games, like the best games to me are the ones that hit all of those things at once. So yeah, as far as that, there's books they just announced. I'm doing a book called Spy Superb that's coming out at the end of the year, that I'm writing, drawing, my wife's painting. And that book, it's coming out as comic book issues first. But the covers, there's going to be a normal cover, and then over that cover is going to be like a paper bag. It's like, so we're disguising, since it's a spy book, I'm disguising it as just like a grocery paper bag. So it sort of looks like a piece of trash when sitting on the shelf, which I hope is not a bad marketing move. But it's a way to sort of like make it stand out in a way also. Some just fun stuff like that. So a bunch of comics coming out in the next year or two. As far as games go, Mind Management, out of print, is reprinted. Should be here in October. It was delayed. It was supposed to be here over the summer. But with all the delays, it's got pushed back. So there should be more Mind Management board game in October. Don't buy it on eBay for $200. I hope you didn't do that.
I did. I'm dying to play it, but we just can't get hold of it over here. So
yeah, no, that's all right. I would have sent you one. It would have gotten there in time probably, but yeah, just wait. October, you can get them at whatever retail price at your local retailer. And other than that, what else? I did a deck of cards. That's the new thing that's coming when those board games come. I wanted to do a deck of playing cards. That's something my wife loves, just like traditional card games. So we play a lot of card games too, just like straight up cards, like rummy and different things. So I wanted to do a deck of playing cards, and she kind of collects them now too. So we ordered the fancy ones, and we'll play with like cool playing cards. But I wanted to design a deck of playing cards that we could use and play all the games she likes to play, but also has a twist to it. So Jay and Sen, who designed the board game, I commissioned them to let's write 52 rules for one for every card, and then that will break or change any game you play. So the deck of cards is a traditional deck of cards. I did art for every one, like different art on every card. And then there's like a little rule, like a 1 or 2 sentence rule for them that should work with almost any game. And then there's a rule for it if it doesn't work, or if it breaks the game, there's a different rule you use. The idea is that I can break this deck of cards out next time I play with my wife, and now there's all these little rules on there.
So it'd be like, today we're going to play 7 of clubs, 9 of diamonds, and king of spades rules.
Yeah. Well, they like some of them are, this card is a wild card, it can be anything, or this card is can be low or high, or this card, if you play this card, you take a card from any opponent's hand, or just different crazy things like that. So what's cool about it is when you're playing, then these cards are floating around in there. It starts to give you that sort of sense of paranoia about like what cards do you have, or if you discard a card that has a rule on it, and then I pick it up. Well, now I have the card with that weird rule on it. Am I going to use it or not? I don't know. It's probably going to be madness, but it'll spice up a normal game.
And so, how happy are you that gamers now are becoming familiar with your work due to the game? And how happy are you with the game now it's finally out and, you know, published with all the nice tactile pieces?
Yeah, I'm so happy. It's like one of the things I'm most proud of. Like, my books will come out and then I don't, you know, I've been doing it so long, I'm just sort of numb to it. But when the game came, anybody that would come to the studio, I would break it out and show them. I'm like, look at this. And I'd open it up and like, look at this thing. And if you take the little red ring and you put it over here, it reveals secret messages. And like, I was just so excited about it. And then, like, I'm very proud of like how it looks and what's in it. But the part I wasn't sure of was like, is it fun? Like, we play tested it and I was like, I'm too close to it. Is this game any good? Like, I don't know. And then the reviews came in and people were really having fun playing it. And I was nervous because I really like the Jack the Ripper game, Letters from Whitechapel, or what's the other one? There's one that's real long.
There's this Fury from Dracula that never ends. Letters from Whitechapel is shorter.
Yeah, but then what's the other? There's another Jack the Ripper one too that's not the smaller, not Whitechapel, but anyway, so I love those games though. But the problem with those is they're so long that only one person gets to be the Jack the Ripper character or whatever. But I thought, I was like, there's no way we're going to beat those games. Those are the best at what they are. And then, but people like this one because I guess everybody can have a chance to be the one that's hiding, you know, or you're trying to find them. And then I was so close to it, I didn't realize that that's a good thing or that's cool, you know? So I had to rely on other people playing it to see if it was any good, which is weird. I just didn't, so I was nervous about that, about the actual game being good, but Jay and Sen are great. And everybody loves them, all their game. I love Acroterias. That almost made my top 5 and I was going to put it on there, but then I thought Jay and Sen would think I'd just put it on there because of them. And I didn't want to pander to them, but Acroterias is one of my favorite games, and that they did. And I love that. But, it's probably the thing in the last 5 or 6 years. It's probably the thing I'm most proud of or most excited about because it's so different than anything I've done.
So your last game then is Ortus Regni. Why are you taking this one to the cabin?
That one, and it's funny is I haven't played that in a couple of years, and it's a weird one. Do you know this game?
I don't. I had to look it up on BGG when I was writing the notes.
My brother turned me on to this one, and it's a guy who just self-publishes it. I think you have to order it from his website. I don't even know if it's still available, or but my brother got me onto it a few years ago, and me and another friend of ours, we all ordered a box, and what I liked about it was the cards there's nothing on it but art. There's no numbers, there's no words, there's no nothing on it. And then every card has its own sort of purpose, and there's like tons of different ones. And so you have to do deck building, but it's deck building without like a bunch of rules where if you play this, then that, you have to read every one. I just like the variability of it, and I like the art was neat. I like that the guy self-published it. It just seemed like almost like a home crafted game that looks professional. And it's really fun to play. And it's another one of those, to me, I guess, where it evolves as you play it. Like you'll build a deck with a theme, and it's like any deck builder, really. You build a deck with a theme and try it out. And then the more you play with the same players, the more you have to adapt or change it or try to be more creative. And I feel like I like that. I like a game where you have to think creatively. It's almost like a sandbox. You know, here's the tools, figure out a way to use them in a different way. But that's a weird one. Nobody ever talks about it. I don't know anybody that's played it except me and my brother and this buddy of ours. But yeah, I think the other part of your question too that I always think about, if somebody's like, oh, if you're on a desert island, what books would you bring? Or I think with this in particular, I would want a game where you could adapt it or you could write new rules for it. Like if really you're here the rest of your life and this is all you have, you want a game where you can build onto it or morph it into something more, build onto it. And I think if you have a deck of cards that don't have any words on them, you could write whole new sets of rules, like doing a whole nother book with all different ways that those cards could work. So that's one thing I was thinking about with your question is what game would last 20 years where you'd never get bored of it? And if it's a game where you could add on to it, do your own little, I don't know, expansion packs.
So I've got one more question for you then. So you're heading out of Missouri down the road and you go around a corner and the back door of the car flies open. 4 of the games fly out down a ravine into a river and are swept away to posterity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat of the car?
It's such a terrible question. Because I feel like I would stop the car.
The river is flowing very fast.
Right. I would desperately try to grab everything up. It's like, at least grab some of the pieces so we can make something new out of what's left. We'll make our own prototype, as much as I hate to say it. But no, I guess Ortus Regni for what I was saying earlier, where that game is really it's like a dry erase board with like these images on it. You could make anything out of it. Like you could sort of make your own new games, write your own rules. I think about this a lot. Is like if all of books, games, music, everything was destroyed, how much could I recreate from my memory? Like what songs could I remember? What books? What plots? I'm not very good at memorizing anything. I forget almost everything. So like, what could I actually recreate from scratch? And the same with board games. Like, what could I recreate from memory? I'm sure I would forget a rule. I forget rules in a game I played last week. I have to reread it every time. So I think, I would pick a game like that where you could build it into a ton of games that you could play forever. That would be it. It's a weird one. I don't know. And then if you ask me next week, I'd probably have a different answer.
So if people want to get hold of you, if people want to see what's coming out from you and all of that stuff, how can they go about doing that?
You can. I have a website, mattkindt.com. If you go there, all my social stuff's on there. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and you can just follow me all those places if you have any questions or need to find anything. I think everything we talked about is available. Except the board game, which will be out in October. But reach out. I try to be friendly.
Brilliant. Well, Matt Kindt, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it in your own blog, podcast, or video. You can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to hop on from the 3-legged stools and the ever-increasing hole in my soul, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.